Greetings. This is Artful Mystic X. I'm Corone, and I'm coming back to talk to you on Hump Day Wednesday about Virgin Mary. I thought, how appropriate. A little levity. And again, I'm going to be talking about Rabbi Tovia Singer, a rabbi in Jerusalem who I find very intriguing and interesting, thought-provoking. And he did a video called Shocker, Jesus' Virgin Birth Shattered. And he had this discussion with Tom Huszti, Huszti, a Unitarian Anabaptist. And I'm not, I am not familiar with that. I must be an offshoot of Christianity of some kind. I'll have to research that. But they had over an hour conversation, very fascinating. And so I wanted to just address this because I find the virgin birth fascinating. And of course, we have to look at it in the context, once again, and the time period. When I was younger, people would mock and laugh about the virgin birth. I find it really funny, and who would possibly believe in that? And of course, if you believe in a God of miracles, then anything can happen. But also today, fast forward to today, I know people who are carrying children who they've never had sex with the child that they're carrying because of IVF. Right? Love that science. So Yeshua could not be born today, right? Because it wouldn't be considered a miracle. But I find that really fascinating. And just how science over time changes. And I want to read the verse from Isaiah 7:14 that they were talking about. So it says, "Therefore Adonai himself will give you people a sign. The young woman will become pregnant, bear a son, and name him Emmanuel. God is with us." Isaiah 7:14. Okay. So he is saying that cannot be because one reason is the word young woman. It's not saying virgin. So I did a little deep dive. I love the rabbit trails in life. I get distracted by rabbit trails all the time. So I studied Hebrew when I was younger, but unfortunately I'm not a great person with language, so I've got to research this myself and look it up. But Alma can be translated as young maiden or virgin. So this is what's so interesting about translators and translations. Words are important. Words matter. So this could have been translated as virgin. Okay. It's used 9 times, Alma, in the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible. Now, when you look at someone like Queen Esther, who was also a virgin, and she was brought to King Xerxes in Persia to be considered among the other virgins to be queen, and she was chosen. What was the word used for her? Well, for her it was used Batala. And that is used 51 times. So that's used more. But it also can be not always just virgin, but it can also be young maiden. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay. So we also have to look at context again, because in that time period, you had to be a virgin. All right. That was part of your, I don't want to say higher price, but it was part of your value, let's just say. Today, we don't have that concept. I mean, you might have some in some cultures and some countries and some areas, and but in a lot of places now, because of birth control and because of the way people are thinking and how they're living, it's I would say it's especially in Western culture, it's very rare for women to be not always. I mean, obviously there's virgins out there getting married, but our culture is not promoting that, let's just say. So back then they were. And so we have to look at that even though it says young maiden, it is inferred that she also would be a virgin. I think what's more important, though, is the word Emmanuel, because that is a word that for a name, for a child, you don't hear God with us. And of course, that is inferring God is with us through a person being born to a virgin, which would insinuate that this is a divine child. Now, Rabbi Singer also goes to the fact of genealogy, because in Matthew, we look at that as Joseph's genealogy. In Luke, it is Mary's genealogy through her father, Heli, Heli, I believe. That because she's married to Joseph, he is then the son-in-law. And so that is in reference to her father. And that goes back through the Davidic line to Adam. And Adam is the son of man, but Adam is the son of God, in the sense that Adam is God's first creation in the garden. There is no sperm used with that. So it's very interesting that they're pulling her genealogy all the way to Adam. Now, Rabbi Singer says that the Messiah must be through the father's line. Now, you can research this, but there are lots of periods and situations where the adoption, a child being adopted by, or if the brother dies, and in that era, another brother would then marry the widow of the brother. And so there's lots of different ways that in the past you could be adopted and still share that line. That was legal, is what I want to say. That you would be legally someone that could have property, that you would be the inheritor legally if you were adopted. And so we can look at that lineage in Matthew through Joseph as being a legal adopted child. But to me, the more important part is the reference back to, let's look at Abraham and Sarah, because that is a story where Sarah was way beyond childbearing years. She'd passed her period. She was old. And the fact that when the angel was saying that she would be getting pregnant, she laughed. Definitely would be a miracle, like Miriam. And the line had to come through Sarah. Okay? God was promising seed through Abraham and Sarah's womb. The woman's womb is very important. In fact, in Judaism today, people would say it's through the line of your mother. Back then, they're saying it's through the father, but the reality is it was through the mother too. Okay? So you had Abraham having sex with Hagar, the servant, the Egyptian, and God still blessing that line. And that's very important, because when we look at the states around the little tiny state of Israel, there are, I believe, 22 Arab states. So they've been blessed. And some of the wealthiest people are from some of the Arab countries, and that's a blessing. So it's not as if God deserted Ishmael and that line from Abraham. In fact, I was shocked that when I was in Israel in 2019, so rockets were coming from Gaza when I was there. That was sort of a given that was happening. But when I went to the Mount of Olives to look at, to find a grave, I was shocked that that was run by Arabs. And that is a Jewish gravesite, one of the oldest grave sites in Israel. And yet that was run by Arabs. And I also was shocked when I was staying in the Hotel David that the call to prayer, the Muslim call to prayer, was blasting at least 3 times a day, although I think they do it 5, but I'm not sure. But anyway, and the mosques were spotting the terrain as I was driving, being driven through the desert to Savet. So yeah, I just you got to go to Israel and you got to see the Jews and the Arabs living and working side by side in Jerusalem, and then just other things that are going on. It's important. But the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because when I was talking in my other video about the Canaanite woman and how that's a lineage of the Palestinians. So the Arabs and the Jews are side by side, obviously, from Abraham and Sarah, Hagar and Ishmael and Isaac. So the Quran. Now, I did not know this. I love the fact that, seek and you will find. And as we keep living, learning, it's so great because we're always finding out new things. I did not know that Mary is mentioned in the Quran 70 times. 70 times. Mary. What? Okay, my head like exploded because I was like, how did I not hear this? And how is it the Christians are talking about this and Jews are talking about this? Because this is fascinating to me that Mary is mentioned in the Quran 70 times, and she is mentioned as the greatest woman to have ever lived. And she is the only woman mentioned in the Quran. What? Okay. What can I say? I'm shocked. But I'm also thinking, how is this not also contributing to the conversation about Yeshua? Because they are saying in the Quran that God informed Mary that she had miraculously conceived a child, the intervention of the divine spirit, though she was still a virgin. And then the name of the child chosen by God would be Isa, which is Jesus, Yeshua, and that he'd be the anointed one, the promised Messiah. Okay, so I really, that just blew me out of the water. It just blew me away. And I have to say that should be something that's discussed, something that's talked about, because just like the Canaanite woman had this faith in Yeshua because she had heard about this rabbi, Yeshua, doing these miracles, and was bold enough. I mean, and I'm saying, it would be like a Palestinian woman today coming into a Jewish rabbi today, begging him to heal her child. I mean, this is unheard of, right? And it's same thing then. And yet now I'm saying, so the virgin birth has been carried along in the Arab oral tradition to the Quran. Wow. And again, we look at oral tradition, and, Rabbi Singer is kind of, saying, well, because the Gospels were written a little bit later. Well, there's a lot of things that are written later in ancient texts that we look at and that we believe in. And, I think that the Iliad and the Odyssey, that was attributed to Homer. That was composed in the 8th century, and the Trojan War happened centuries earlier, around the 12th century. And yet scholars take that and they use that. The Epic of Gilgamesh is also something that is considered the earliest surviving great work of literature. Dates back to 2100 BCE, but that historical figure was from centuries earlier. So, just because something is written a little bit earlier, I mean, later, after the events, doesn't mean that it should be thrown out and not looked at and considered, especially because we know that even events that happen in our own time, based on who's writing about them, aren't necessarily given the full history or the full story either, right? I mean, you can have eyewitnesses at something, and you have all kinds of different things that are being said, or the slant, the bias that somebody wants to bring. Another thing that Rabbi Singer brought up was Rome didn't convert to Christianity, Christianity converted to Rome. And I think that's also interesting because he's referring to the myths, the mythology, the Zeus, the virgins, that's all pagan, and that somehow, because the Gospels are written later, they're taking those stories. But I actually think of it a little bit differently. I think about it the fact that, like today, people aren't necessarily virgins when they get married, and today we are not embracing, the majority of people, mythology, right? We're not embracing Zeus, and we don't have altars to Zeus, and at that time they did. And so here you have God bringing Yeshua into a world that had that as their conversation, and a real, not an imaginary myth, but a real God is being born to a virgin, which is a powerful statement that God is making to the cultures of the time. Love you all.